300 races, 60 Grand Prix, I've forgotten how many TTs and World Championships, but where do you go from here? I mean, what
down. Iconic colours, it's what a Honda should be. I know there's red and blue and whatever, but...
Honda ruled motorcycle racing in the 70s. Fast, rich, unbeatable. Well, one washed-up rider on an old Ducati was about to turn their world upside down. 1978, Honda's machines dominated every track. Then a retired racer returned after 11 years, signing a £1,000 deal for a leaky, outdated Ducati. Everyone laughed, even Honda's engineers didn't flinch. What no one realized, this rider was legendary. On that supposedly hopeless Ducati, he was about to dismantle Honda's empire and rewrite racing history. This is the shocking truth behind the Ducati that silenced Honda and the legend who made it happen. By 1978, Honda had turned motorcycle racing into their personal demonstration of Japanese superiority. Phil Reed and his factory Honda team weren't just winning races, they were making everyone else look amateur. The TT Formula 1 class belonged to Honda's four-cylinder machines, with their sophisticated engineering and unlimited factory budgets crushing anything that dared challenge them.
To be inducted to the most prestigious Automotive Hall of Fame.
The numbers told the story of Honda's dominance: multiple world championships, TT victories, and a racing program so well funded that independent teams couldn't dream of competing. When Honda's riders lined up at the start, everyone else was racing for second place. Phil Reed was the perfect weapon for Honda's assault on the Isle of Man. The former world champion knew how to extract every ounce of performance from Honda's four-cylinder technology, and his experience on the treacherous mountain course made him nearly unbeatable. Honda's strategy was simple and devastating: outspend, out-engineer, and outpower everyone else. Their TT Formula 1 machines represented everything modern motorcycle racing had become: complex, expensive, and completely dominated by factory teams with unlimited resources. For independent teams and smaller manufacturers, Honda's dominance felt like a death sentence for competitive racing. How could anyone challenge a corporation that treated racing as a showcase for their technological superiority? But 5,000 miles away from Honda's gleaming facilities, a Manchester motorcycle dealer was about to prove that passion and desperation could still overcome corporate perfection.
Pretty easy to identify with its look and fairing and so forth. They only ran them for a...
What Steve Wynn was planning would shock the racing world and create one of the most unlikely victories in motorsport history. The weapon he chose was as old-fashioned as Honda's was modern, but it would carry a rider who understood something Honda's engineers had forgotten. Steve Wynn should have been satisfied with almost winning. His sports motorcycle team had come achingly close to TT glory in 1976 and 1977, only to watch mechanical failures and controversial decisions hand victory to Honda. Most people would have accepted that independent teams simply couldn't compete with factory budgets and engineering resources, but Wynn had made this personal. The 1977 TT Formula 1 race still haunted him. Roger Nichols had been beating Phil Reed's works Honda when the race was controversially shortened, gifting Honda a victory they hadn't earned on the track. The biggest disappointment of my life, Wynn admitted years later. That defeat planted a seed of obsession.
Time, everybody had pinned so much hope and faith and money and effort into the whole program, and
would drive everything Wynn did next. He wouldn't just beat Honda, he would humiliate them with a machine they'd never see coming. The plan began with a chance encounter at Silverstone. Wynn was preparing his Ducati for another attempt when he was introduced to a visitor from New Zealand, a 30-year-old man who had been living in retirement since walking away from motorcycle racing in 1967. Mike Hailwood looked at the red and silver Ducati, swung his leg over the seat, and made an observation that would change everything. "This is the kind of old-fashioned bike I understand. Wouldn't mind doing another TT on this." Half-jokingly, Wynn replied, "Why don't you?" With a handshake and a £1,000 fee, the deal was done. But what Wynn didn't realize was that he'd just recruited not a rider, but the one man who could expose Honda's greatest weakness: their inability to understand that sometimes raw talent matters more than perfect engineering. But Honda had spent years building an empire based on the opposite philosophy. What happened when these two worldviews collided would determine the future of motorcycle racing forever.
The thing that Mike Hailwood had that the others didn't have.
What Wynn ordered from Ducati was deceptively simple compared to Honda's sophisticated four-cylinder weapons. The Ducati 900 SS NCR was old school in every way that mattered. Air-cooled L-twin engine, simple chassis design, gold wheels and traditional Italian styling that looked more like art than engineering. Where Honda's machines hummed with complex precision, the Ducati would roar with mechanical fury. But simplicity was exactly what made it dangerous. While Honda's engineers had created perfect racing machines that required perfect conditions and perfect setup, Ducati had built something more primitive and more honest. The 864cc L-twin engine made power in a way that any experienced rider could understand and exploit. Win wasn't just buying motorcycles, he was investing in a philosophy. Where Honda represented the future of racing and technology complexity, Ducati offered something from racing's past: raw power, intuitive handling, and the kind of mechanical character that great riders could bond with instantly. The preparation process revealed just how different this approach would be from Honda's factory effort.
Mike on a bike was something else.
He just sailed through.
Win reworked the heads with larger valves, changed pistons and ignition timing, and most importantly, solved Ducati's notorious gearbox weakness through a connection that would have been impossible for any other rider. Mike Hewland, the legendary Formula One gearbox designer, redesigned Ducati's gear ratios completely free of charge, not because he was paid to, but because he respected what Mike Hailwood represented in motorsport. It was the kind of personal relationship that no corporate racing program could duplicate. The result was a machine that looked simple but contained innovations that Honda's engineers would have never discovered until it was too late. More importantly, it was a bike that felt right to a rider who understood that winning wasn't about having the most advanced technology, it was about having the most effective combination of man and machine.
Put Ducati on the map as a builder of performance motorcycles in the large capacity.
What Honda didn't know was that their most dangerous enemy had just been born in a Manchester workshop, and it was about to announce itself with a sound that would haunt Honda's engineers for decades. When the Ducati fired up for the first time at the Isle of Man, everyone knew something fundamental had changed. The sound alone announced that this wasn't another privateer effort trying to make up numbers. The air-cooled L-twin created a mechanical roar that cut through the sophisticated hum of Honda's four-cylinder engines like thunder through a symphony. But it wasn't just the sound that was different, it was everything about how Hailwood approached the mountain course. Where Honda's riders relied on their bike's technological advantages, Hailwood was rediscovering something he'd never lost: the ability to make any motorcycle transcend its engineering limitations. Practice sessions revealed something that terrified Honda's team managers. Hailwood wasn't just fast, he was effortlessly fast. The Ducati looked relaxed and manageable, whereas Honda's machines appeared to require constant management and precise technique. But there was something even more unsettling for Honda's corporate racing philosophy. Hailwood was learning the bike's character in real time, adapting his riding style to complement the Ducati's strengths rather than fighting against its weaknesses. Honda's riders had been trained to extract maximum profit from perfectly engineered machines.
For Hailwood's cut Agostini's lead to a mere 2 seconds. So this could win.
Hailwood was doing something far more dangerous. He was making an imperfect machine perform beyond its design limits through intuitive understanding. The air-cooled L-twin engine revealed its personality to Hailwood in ways that Honda's sophisticated four-cylinders never could to their riders. Where Honda's engineers demanded precise throttle control and technical perfection, the Ducati rewarded smooth inputs and flowing cornering technique. It was like watching a master musician discover a vintage instrument and immediately understand how to make it sing. Mike topped the TT F1 leaderboard with a new lap record at 111 miles per hour, Steve Wynn recalled, yet was convinced he'd only done 105 miles per hour or so because the Ducati felt so easy and relaxing to ride. Think about what that meant. After 11 years away from motorcycle racing, Hailwood was not just competitive, he was setting lap records while feeling like he was cruising.
Well, I'm very proud to have done it naturally, but...
Honda's riders were pushing their sophisticated machines to absolute limits just to match the times that Hailwood was achieving without apparent effort. The racing world was witnessing something the Honda's corporate racing philosophy couldn't account for: the emergence of a rider who could make inferior technology look superior through pure talent and experience. But Honda still had advantages that no amount of skill could overcome: factory support, backup machines, and a team of engineers who understood every component of their racing effort. What they didn't expect was that their greatest advantage would become their greatest weakness when faced with a rider who didn't need any of those things. Just when victory seemed within reach, Ducati's factory engineers made a decision that almost destroyed everything Steve Wynn had worked to achieve. Franco Farna, the Ducati Works engineer, had been watching Hailwood's practice sessions with growing concern. The engine that Wynn had carefully prepared and tuned was performing beautifully, but Farna worried about the high mileage it had accumulated during testing.
A Landroom Lizard, it's been out in the roads. I've pushed it.
On Friday night, one day before the race, Farna convinced Wynn to install a fresh engine that Ducati had brought from Italy. Hailwood completed exactly 1 lap with the new motor before race day. It was a decision that would haunt everyone involved. The replacement engine was good enough to win the race, but it was significantly slower than Wynn's carefully developed original. Worse, it carried a fatal flaw that wouldn't be discovered until the moment of victory. The bottom bevel gear on the rear cylinder was defective. Wynn had unknowingly agreed to replace his weapon of choice with a time bomb. But there was something even more dramatic happening behind the scenes that revealed just how much pressure surrounded Hailwood's comeback attempt. Steve Wynn had been receiving hundreds of letters from Hailwood fans, many containing death threats, holding him personally responsible if their hero was killed or injured. The atmosphere was so intense that when Motorcycle News accidentally published a photo showing the bike's sump plug incorrectly, 40 to 50 people contacted Wynn to warn him about the mistake. The entire racing world was watching, and everyone had opinions about what could go wrong.
They built the bikes for Hailwood and Jimmy Scasebrook.
This wasn't just a motorcycle race. It had become a referendum on whether legends could return and whether passionate individuals could still compete against corporate perfection. The pressure was enormous, and everyone knew that failure would be visible to the entire motorsport world. What nobody understood was that this pressure would forge the perfect conditions for something extraordinary. When something that could go wrong did go wrong at exactly the right moment, it would create the most dramatic finish in TT history. June 9th, 1978, the Isle of Man TT Formula 1 race would become one of the most dramatic contests in motorcycle racing history. Phil Reed and his factory Honda team lined up knowing they had every advantage: superior technology, unlimited factory support, and the confidence that came from owning the class for years. They weren't just racing against Mike Hailwood, they were defending the entire philosophy of modern corporate racing. Hailwood sat on his red and green Ducati, knowing he was riding with a fresh engine he'd barely tested, on a course he hadn't raced in over a decade, against riders who had been developing their craft while he'd been in retirement. The mathematics seemed impossible.
Game from last year, and that's Ducati. The factory Ducati team have really done a great job.
Honda's four-cylinder engines made more power and revved higher than the air-cooled Ducati twin. Their riders were in their racing prime, with years of recent TT experience. Their support teams could solve any problem that arose during the race. But mathematics doesn't account for the intangible elements that separate great races from merely fast ones. From the start, Hailwood began demonstrating something that Honda's engineers couldn't quantify or duplicate. Where their riders fought their sophisticated machines through the mountain course's technical sections, Hailwood danced with his Ducati like they'd been partners for years. The L-twin engine's power delivery was perfectly matched to the TT course's character. Where Honda's high-revving four-cylinder required precise throttle management, the Ducati's torquey twin pulled strongly from low RPM and forgave mistakes that would have cost time on more temperamental machines. Lap after lap, Hailwood pulled away from Phil Reed and the Honda factory team. It wasn't just that he was winning, it was how he was winning.
On these, and funnily enough, it was this bike against the RC30s.
The Ducati looked stable and controlled, while the Hondas appeared to be operating at their absolute limits. With one lap remaining, Hailwood had built an insurmountable lead. The impossible was about to become a reality. A 38-year-old comeback rider on a privateer Ducati was about to humiliate Honda's factory effort in front of the entire racing world. But the racing gods had been watching this David and Goliath story unfold, and they had decided that a victory this dramatic deserved an ending that would be talked about for decades. Mike Hailwood crossed the finish line with a lead so commanding that Phil Reed and the Honda factory team had been relegated to also-ran status. The crowd erupted. 11 years of retirement had ended with the most unlikely victory in TT history. But in the exact moment Hailwood shut off the throttle after the crossing line, the Ducati's bottom bevel gear disintegrated. Victory and mechanical death occurred simultaneously. Steve Wynn pushed the silent Ducati back to the Parc Ferme, not knowing that the engine had literally exploded the instant Hailwood stopped racing it.
It's got a twin seat with a small bezel that comes off.
When FIM officials asked if the brake would start for the mandatory noise test, Wynn agreed that it wouldn't, not because he was avoiding the test, but because the engine was now scrap metal. The timing was so perfect it seemed scripted. Had the gear failed one corner earlier, Hailwood would have coasted to a stop just short of his greatest triumph. Had it held together for 10 more seconds, the failure might have been discovered and cast doubt on the victory. Instead, it failed at the only moment when failure didn't matter, the exact instant when the race was already won. What happened next would expose the true nature of corporate racing and prove that Honda's defeat was more devastating than anyone realized. Because losing to superior technology is acceptable, losing to a superior heart is unforgivable. Honda's response to their humiliating defeat revealed just how seriously they took Hailwood's victory. This wasn't just a racing loss, it was a fundamental challenge to everything Honda believed about modern motorcycle competition.
We thought we'd fixed them this morning, so we'll just have to wait and see. I'm definitely going for a finish.
They had been outfoxed by a retired rider and a passionate dealer using technology that Honda considered obsolete. The immediate aftermath showed Honda's true priorities. Instead of congratulating a legendary performance or acknowledging that they had been beaten by superior racecraft, Honda's corporate machine began working to ensure this humiliation could never happen again. But the deeper story was what Hailwood's victory meant for the future of motorcycle racing. Independent teams and passionate individuals had proven they could still compete with corporate factory efforts, but only under very specific circumstances that were becoming increasingly rare. The 1978 TT represented the end of an era disguised as a triumphant return. Hailwood had won using old-school methods, but the racing world was moving towards a future where such victories would become impossible. Factory budgets were growing larger, technology was becoming more complex, and the margin for error was shrinking to the point where only perfectly supported corporate efforts could remain competitive.
Here down to the superbikes and also the MotoGP, which is 1,000 kilometres from the...
Hailwood's victory was magnificent precisely because everyone understood it could never happen again. Honda learned from their defeat, not by developing better riders or more intuitive machines, but by ensuring that future racing would be contested under conditions where their technological and financial advantages could never be overcome by individual brilliance. The Ducati victory was a masterpiece, but it was also a funeral. It was the last time racing's past would defeat racing's future in open competition. What happened to Mike Hailwood's TT-winning Ducati after its moment of glory reveals everything about how the racing world values genuine history versus manufactured legend. Steve Wynn, financially exhausted from the racing effort, sold the bike to a Japanese collector for £5,000 in 1978. It seemed like a reasonable price for a used racing motorcycle with a blown engine and crash damage from a later race. The decision haunted him for decades. What Wynn had casually sold as worn-out racing equipment would become one of the most sought-after motorcycles in history.
The original is what it is, the £1 million bike is recorded, but it's changed.
18 years later, that same motorcycle was sold at auction in Los Angeles for more than £80,000, with Wynn himself trying unsuccessfully to buy back the machine he'd once considered worthless. The irony was crushing. The man who had created the legend couldn't afford to own the machine that made it possible. Wynn's failed £80,000 bid represented more than financial regret. It symbolized how completely the racing world had changed, where the value of history far exceeded the cost of creating it. But the real crime wasn't the financial loss. It was what happened to racing motorcycles that tried to fake the Ducati's legendary status. Multiple Hailwood TT winners appeared over the years, each claiming to be the genuine article, each selling for enormous sums to collectors who desperately wanted to own a piece of racing history. The forgeries revealed something important about what Hailwood's victory represented. It wasn't just about winning a race. It was about proving that individual excellence could still triumph over corporate perfection.
The first generation, the first with the 16 inches wheels.
Beautiful bike.
People wanted to own that story, even if they had to buy fake motorcycles to possess it. Meanwhile, Ducati capitalized on the victory by producing over 7,000 Mike Hailwood replica street bikes over 7 years, using the TT win to establish their racing credibility and save the company from near bankruptcy. Neither Hailwood nor Wynn received royalties from bikes that traded entirely on their achievement. The genuine winning motorcycle eventually returned to the track in 1998 for the 20th anniversary of Hailwood's victory, still wearing every component that had been part of that legendary performance. Seeing it in action again was described as very moving and a vivid reminder of how much of a loss it was that Mike can't be with us himself. But perhaps the most telling detail is that the bike still carried the modifications and battle scars from its racing life, proof that it had been built to be used, not preserved. It represented a philosophy of racing that valued performance over perfection, results over appearance. That philosophy died with the era it represented.
By taking some of the weight off the front, we've done a similar thing. They've been very good giving us some of the data.
Mike Hailwood's 1978 TT victory should have been the beginning of a new chapter in motorcycle racing. Instead, it became the final page of an old one. The win proved that passion, skill, and mechanical sympathy could still overcome unlimited budgets and advanced technology. But it also demonstrated why such victories would become impossible in modern racing. Honda's defeat taught them valuable lessons about the importance of controlling not just technology, but the entire competitive environment. Future racing regulations would be written to favor the kind of sophisticated, expensive machinery that only factory teams could develop and maintain. Hailwood returned to racing because he loved the purity of man and machine working together to achieve something greater than either could accomplish alone. That purity was exactly what modern racing was systematically eliminating in favor of predictable, corporate-controlled competition. The 1978 TT victory stands as proof that racing's golden age wasn't defined by the sophistication of the machinery. It was defined by the quality of the people who rode it.
Motorcycles. But there's a thing about a Ducati to me which is just, it's the pinnacle
And great riders could still make inferior equipment competitive through skill and determination. Racing mattered in ways that perfectly engineered corporate exercises never could. Honda learned from their defeat, but what they learned was how to ensure such defeats could never happen again. Not by becoming better, but by making the sport less hospitable to the kind of individual excellence that had made their humiliation possible. The Ducati that silenced Honda in 1978 wasn't just a motorcycle. It was the last successful challenge to the corporate takeover of motorcycle racing, and its victory was simultaneously the sport's greatest triumph and its final defeat. Here's our question for you. If you had the chance to challenge today's corporate racing teams with nothing but passion, skill, and an old-school machine, would you take it? Or has modern racing become too sophisticated for individual brilliance to matter anymore? Let us know in the comments what you think. And if you want to see more stories about the riders and machines that changed motorcycle racing forever, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.